Resume live streaming of the hearing, so please just bear with us for a few minutes. Thank you.
Actually, bear with us right till now. We're back online.
Oh, bear with us until now. We are back online.
Okay. Chief Greg Burke. Do you affirm that this eagle feather symbolizes your direct connection to the Creator for your people, and you hold it in the spirit of honor and truth to your ancestors who have passed, and to your ancestral spirits who are here today to guide you and protect you, that the evidence you shall give in this matter shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Je fais, I do. Well, Anna.
Thank you, Chief Burke. For those of us that don't know you, can you please state your name and let us know where you're from?
John Gregory Burke, originally from Cape Breton, Glace Bay. Don't hold that against me, though. I run a financial practice in Halifax. I live outside of Halifax now, and my office is in Bedford. My name is John Gregory Burke.
Thank you. Can you tell us a little bit about your background, Chief Burke?
Well, you don't want to know it all, but I just want to share with you that I do have 4 years of nursing at Toronto East General, and I'm just not another head in the crowd. So going through this was very difficult for me, knowing that the knowledge that I had through my training, that I worked in the OR cardiac arrest unit, as well as we did training in pathology as well as the OR. So I'm well versed not only in our Constitution or my treaty rights, but I'm also well versed in the medical field in sterilization.
Chief Burke, I understand you've had some significant health issues fairly recently, prior to or pretty much at the onset of COVID that are not COVID related. Can you tell us more about those, please?
Yeah, I diagnosed myself with cancer back in 2019. In our medical system being what it is, they didn't go, what I told my doctor, I guess maybe I shouldn't have directed the doctor, but I told him I wanted to go to a private clinic and get a ultrasound done and get my blood work done, and it all came back negative. So I went on my way thinking it was, I was getting old, I guess, and figured it was just an old age thing. But in 2021, January 2021, I went to him. I said, "Look, I definitely have cancer." I said, I have to get a colonoscopy done. So I had a colonoscopy done, and I ended up with surgery in April of 2021, and were followed by 8 treatments of chemo, which ended in December 24th of 2021. Following that, when they did the CT scan, they found 3 blood clots in my lungs due to the chemo treatment, so they had me on a high dose of blood thinners from January through to June.
Were you on a medication for your cancer?
Yeah, I had the 8 treatments of chemo, as well as they gave me Dilaudid, which I didn't use. I didn't need Dilaudid, and through my surgery I didn't need Dilaudid. Although they told me to take it, they said opioids gets a bad rap, but for some reason I didn't have pain, but I took the Dilaudid home with me, and of course they give you all kinds of mouthwash to kill the lumps and bumps that get in your mouth, and the lumps and bumps that get all over your body. So yeah, I was on medication as well as the blood thinners.
You said that lumps and bumps all over your body. Can you tell us more about that? That's related to the medication?
Yeah, it was hard to describe. It got to the point where it got so bad that I couldn't touch myself, actually, because there were like little hives, like millions of little hives all over your body. And the chemo treatment causes tissue damage. So even today, as I sit here today, my feet are on fire from the tissue damage, as well as tissue damage on the hands. Your hands never, someday maybe they'll get back to normal. But as I was explaining to you, Chris, even today I struggle trying to take the top off a plastic Tupperware.
Did the medications affect your cognitive abilities at all?
Well, combined with the operation and the chemo treatment, you end up with chemo fog brain, they call it.
What does that mean? Can you explain that a little bit further? What do you mean by that? What happens?
Well, a cop asked me that. He said, "What do you mean by chemo fog brain?" The best way I can describe it is, it's not like you're drunk, but it's almost like you're in a daze, like you're stupid, So it's your reaction time and your thinking time isn't sharp, You do everything slow, you move slow, you talk slow, you react slow.
So it takes you a little bit longer to process information when you're having a conversation sometimes, depending on at that time?
Yeah, you have to compress it and then react.
Because of the chemo treatments that you went through and the diagnosis of the blood clots in your lungs, were you given a medical exemption, for example, for wearing a mask? When I started the chemo treatment in June of 2021, they gave me a yellow card. I'll just show that to everybody if they're not familiar with it. This is a go to the Emerge card. There's all kinds of warnings on it. If you're having a heart attack or high blood pressure or fever, whatever, I override everything in the Emerge other than car accident. And because of this, you're very susceptible to bacteria or whatever, and everything I know about wearing the chin diaper, working in the OR, what people were wearing was really a joke to me. So, and when I see people wearing it, I felt sorry for them, knowing how dangerous it was for their health. Craig, I'm just going to real quickly forward the commissioners. Their exhibit Chief Burke is referring to, there are a number of them, and the labels will be TR-010, as well as TR-010A through E. Those will be the exhibits that we're referring to. Chief Burke, I'm going to fast forward a little bit. I want to take you to an incident on February 9th, 2022, at approximately 3 p.m. Can you tell me about that, please?
Sure. Well, because I wasn't wearing a mask, I didn't wear a mask at any time in hospitals. I was there every 14 days to get my blood checked to make sure hematology or my hemoglobin was good and white cells were fine. And actually, I'll share something with you. Is when I first arrived there to get my blood checked to take my first treatment of chemo, there was a lady there said, while I was going to the washroom, I didn't hear her say, but my wife heard her say that you make him wear a mask. And the oncologist came up to my wife with the mask, not sterilized. If you're going to touch these things, you have to be sterilized. You got to scrub up. Anyway, the oncologist said to my wife, could you get your husband to wear a mask? And Susan said, good luck with that. So when they asked me, I said, no, I'm not going to wear it. I said, it's on your finger. You're not sterile, so I'm not going to touch it. So, and I went into several stores, and of course, when I explained to them my condition, they were okay with it.
and we went into Canadian Tire. And I really just would like for you to talk to us what happened up until the interaction with the owner, because I would like to show a video for that particularly.
Yeah, I went into Canadian Tire, as Chris said, on February the 9th. It was around 2:45, and I was going to return an item, and I walked up to the return desk. There was a huge plexiglass on the return desk, a girl behind it wearing a face mask, and I put my item down, and she said, "You've got to wear a mask." And I said, I don't wear a mask. She said, "Do you have an exemption?" I said, "Yeah, I do have an exemption." She said, "Well, I can't wait on you." I said, "Why not?" And she said, "Well, you're a danger to my health." I said, "You're behind plexiglass wearing a mask. How am I a danger to your health?" And she said, "Well, you're a danger. I'm not going to wait on you." And she walked away from me. And I said, "Well, can I speak to the manager?" And bear in mind here, I've got chemo brain, so it's almost like you're in sort of a dream here. And so she picked up the phone, and I stood there probably for about 5 minutes, 6 minutes, waiting for the manager to show up. Everybody was calling. The girls at the cash register were trying to get a hold of a Mr. Keating, and while I was leaning against the railing, this individual. Did you want me to go further with this?
No, I want you right up to the point
Okay.
that you're going through now.
So this individual showed up, and he kind of towered over me, and he
Just
started.
1 second, Greg. I'm going to just stop you right there. Unfortunately, I don't have HDMI capability on my side, so I need to walk over to Chief Burks to show you the video on the laptop.
Did you want me to keep explaining, or? Okay.
I'm going to play the video.
Okay.
And when I play the video for you, you can watch it and you can get out of the light for the audience as well.
Okay.
What we'll do is you narrate it. If you
Okay. All right. So Chris asked me to narrate this for you while it's on the screen. So you can see me. I'm up at the desk.
I'm putting the arrow to Chief Burke, as you can see there. So he's a jump in the blue.
I noticed that gentleman in the blue kept looking at me because I didn't have a mask.
I'm just going to skip forward just a little bit until
Yeah.
the interaction occurs. Because now you're waiting for a few minutes.
Okay, so she's waiting on me there, or telling me that she can't wait on me. I asked to speak to the manager, so she disappeared there, and she went on the phone to call the manager. And I stepped back, and you see me leaning there while I'm waiting. And I waited. And I waited. And I waited. And there, this guy shows up.
Bring it back just
Okay.
until he enters.
Okay, this guy shows up, and he never asked me who I was, what I was doing there, nothing. He just immediately started saying, "If you're not going to wear a mask," and he's screaming, "leave the store," and you can see his hand gesture. And I said, and you can see me asking him to calm down, because he's white-faced, dried mouth, and very confrontational. And I'm saying, I just want to explain something to you here. And he said, no, I'm not going to listen to you. If you're not going to wear a mask, get out. And you see him shaking his head back and forth, saying no. And that's when he gave me three options. First option was, I can do my business out on the street. Second was, I can do it online. This is returning an item now. And the third, I can wear a mask. And I immediately said to him, no, that's not an option, but let me think of my other option. And I put my head down to figure out, how am I going to do this outside? They got to bring the machine out. This is how my brain was working that day. And then when I left, I didn't notice he went to the other side. And when I raised my head to ask him how I was going to do it outside, he immediately said, okay, you see him grabbing me there. He immediately said, if you're not going to wear a mask, I'm going to throw you out. And I said, what do you mean? Like you're physically going to throw me out? I couldn't believe he said that. He said, that's right. And I said, I laughed at him, and I started to go to leave, and I said, that wouldn't be a good idea. And I wasn't referring to that I would knock him out, which maybe I should have, but what I was referring to was my health. I'm on high blood pressure, or high dose of blood thinners. I'm suffering from chemo brain fog, and I'm not myself, so that's what I was referring to. So I think that triggered him, and that's why he grabbed me. And I pushed him off me, and I was warning him not to touch me, but he came at me again, and I pushed him off again, and he backs me up to the corner, or to the return desk, and I thought that I grabbed him to hold him off, but obviously the video didn't do that. But I did warn him. I said, look, I said, don't you dare touch me. I said, and this is the way I said it, because I'm not an excitable type of individual, because there he grabs me again. And I had to push him away again. And that's where I told him, don't touch me, I can hurt you. And believe me, I can hurt you. So at that point, he's hollering, giving directions to call the cops. And I said to him, now I'm right about now, I'm very nervous. I'm not afraid of him, but I'm nervous of him doing something that I'm not expecting, and he'd get the advantage over me. Because if you know anybody on blood thinners, you get cut, you're going to bleed pretty bad. So that was my worry there. And I told him, I said, well, I'm going to call the cops. You go ahead, I'm going to have you charged with assault. So while I was leaving, Chris is not showing that, but as I was leaving, he kept following me, and I said, don't follow me, don't, because I was worried that he was going to jump me from behind. And anyway, I went out into my car, and I waited in my car. I called the 911 when I was in my car, and he came out. And I thought, okay, he's come to his senses. He's going to come and apologize. And
One second, Greg. I'm sorry. I thought I pressed play to finish the video, and I walked away. My apologies for that. So we'll go over the interesting.
okay. So he's giving orders to the girl to call the cops. And right about now, I'm I don't know. This guy's unpredictable. I mean, he's crazy. His eyes were like that coming at me.
Chief Burke, I know that the video is still playing, and we can probably switch off of that. Thank you. Again, because you do exit the store at that point in time. The lady that walked off, she at this time is actually calling 911, and the audio recording for that is available to the commissioners. It is one of the exhibits. As well as when you went outside, Chief Burke, after the confrontation, and then you went outside. I know the store owner followed you, but what happened outside of the store?
Well,
did you call anybody?
Yeah, I called 911 and told them that I've been assaulted and I want charges laid against the. I thought he was the manager. I didn't know he was the owner.
For the commissioners, that 911 recording is also part of the exhibits that you can listen to. After that, what had taking place? Fast forward to when the police officer arrives.
Yeah,
What
when
happens then?
I was talking to two RCMP officers that were in the parking lot at the time. They were on their coffee break, and we were chatting. And I waited about 15, 20 minutes, and this Bedford cop showed up, and he asked me what was going on, and I said, "Go watch the video and come back and talk to me," which he did. He went in, and he come back out. It was a beautiful day, and he was wearing one of those N95 masks, and I thought, oh boy, this is going to be good for me. They called the right guy. So anyway, he went in, he came out, and he said, yeah, I watched the video. He said, yeah, he grabbed you, but you defended yourself. I'm not going to charge him. I'm not going to charge you. And I said, you're not going to charge me. I defended myself. And he said, well, he's allowed to do that. Yeah. So just the Bedford Canadian Tire store, bring a bodyguard with you because they're allowed to grab you.
Chief Burke, excuse me, please keep it down,
Yeah.
thank you. Chief Burke, the interaction with the police officer, can you tell me specifically about that? What was the conversation you had with him, and what was the result of that?
Well, it wasn't much. After he said that he wasn't going to charge me, he said, I'm going to give you a ticket. And I said, a ticket for what? He said, for not wearing a mask. And I said, a ticket for not? And I'm thinking, what ticket? And he walked away. He didn't ask me what transpired inside, nothing. And he went to his car, and I waited and waited in my car, and then I went over to his car probably about 15, 20 minutes, and I said, you know, what's going on? He said, well, I'm having difficulty. They change the rules all the time, so I got to find out if I'm charging you with the right thing or not. So he said, I apologize for taking so long, but here's a ticket for not wearing a mask. And I said, not wearing them, what the heck? And I looked, it was $2,422, something like that.
So the interaction with the police officer resulted in you receiving a fine for not wearing a mask. Did the officer at any point ask you if you had a mask exemption?
No.
So there were no inquiries whatsoever about what transpired inside. He went inside the store, and he felt satisfied with what he observed to issue you a fine, but not proceed with anything else.
Yeah. No, this, what I found out later, when I tried to force him to put an assault charge on this guy, and when I spoke to his sergeant said, well, I read his notes, and, you know, I don't see that we should file assault charges. It's not going to go anywhere. And I said, you read my notes? And he said, well, yeah. I said, he didn't take any whatever from me. He didn't take any statement. He said, well, we got it on. I said, well, he didn't even talk to me about it. So he said, well, I'll send over an officer now. 10 minutes? Okay. Or 15, because he held up 5 minutes too. Anyway,
Chief
where was I?
Chief Burke, I would like to, unfortunately, I kind of need to stop this one here because we have another very important incident
Okay.
that we definitely have to get to.
Yeah. I just will say this, that the cop lied to Canadian Tire and told him I was banned for 6 months, and he never ever put a ban on me for 6 months. So this guy was a loose cannon. Okay.
So, thank you. I want to fast forward you 30 days to an incident on March 9th that you were also involved in. Can you briefly describe that for me?
Well, that was actually 30 days after the Canadian Tire assault. So Canadian Tire was February 9th, and this is March 9th. And there was a homeless guy that I knew from years ago living in his car, so I thought I'd go by and buy him supper. It was a late evening, and so we went to A&W, and I walked in, and the girl said, you got to wear a mask. I said, I don't wear a mask. And she said, well, you do your order by the plexiglass. So I ordered for both of us. And all of a sudden, this guy comes out of you can tell he was a migrant. He came out of the door like a cannon, shot him through the door, and started screaming for me to wear a mask. And I said, well, I got my order. It's right there. And he kept saying, you got to wear a mask. And he was screaming. He was really upset. And I said, well, do I wear a mask if I sit down? No. I said, well, I'll sit down and you can bring it. No, he wouldn't do it. And I said, how long have you been in the country? He said, 3 months. I said, did they teach you anything about the Canadian Bill of Rights? I don't care about your Canadian Bill of Rights. I said, if you don't care about my Canadian Bill of Rights, you go back to the country where you don't have rights. And anyway, he said, well, I'm calling the RCMP. I said, go ahead. I said, give me my money back. And he wouldn't give me my money back. So I said, when the RCMP come, I'm charging you with theft because I want my money. I'm leaving. Now, and
Chief
this is the way I was talking.
I'm sorry, can you, I hate to interject, but in the interest of time, can you take us to the moment outside when the police arrived regarding this incident?
Yeah, I'm not a long-winded person, but I'll try to be short. So as I was leaving, two RCMP officers were walking in. They said, what's going on? I said, well, I came here to order food. They took my order. Then he wouldn't give me the money back, and I'm just about to leave. He said, well, let's go outside and we'll talk about it. I said, yeah, okay. So we go outside, and he said, do you have your ID? I said, yeah. Show me your ID. I said, did I break the law? He said, no. I said, well, you don't need my ID. I'm leaving. He said, no, you're not. I said, I'm detained? No. I said, well, I'm leaving. Give me your ID. No. So that went back and forth. As this was going back and forth, and I was trying to explain to the RCMP the rights and the laws, this little RCMP officer's coming across the parking lot, and he immediately grabbed me and tried to throw me up against the wall. And he said he was going to charge me with resistance. And I said, I'm not resisting. I said, you can't handle my arms. I said, just relax. I said, I'll give you my arms. If you want to handcuff me, you want to go down this rabbit hole, let's go down this rabbit hole. So I helped him handcuff me from behind, and then he started pushing me towards his car. And I warned him not to push me, and he didn't push me after that. And we get in the car. Now, you have to appreciate my skin's still hurting from the chemo treatment, and he was helpful. He helped me get my legs in the back seat of the car, because if anybody's been in the back seat of an RCMP car, they're like getting in a coffin. So anyway.
Chief Burke, I want to just really touch upon when you had that interaction with the one police officer. You were having a conversation about the masking situation when an officer came across from the parking lot and basically put his hands on you to effect an arrest. Did they tell you that you were under arrest at any time before they laid their hands on you, before they touched you?
Sorry, repeat that again?
When the second officer came,
yep,
and who then physically tried to take control of you, did he advise you that you were under arrest at that time?
No, no.
Okay. How much force would you say, I know it's difficult to gauge, but when he tried to gain control of you, was there a struggle? Is that why he was saying,
yeah,
stop resisting? Were you struggling? Were you resisting the officer?
Yeah, he tried to slam me up against a brick wall. That's what he tried to do, and I tried to prevent it because I didn't want my face to go into the brick wall, because I'm still on blood thinners.
Right. Okay. Right. So then you were cooperative and you allowed him to put the handcuffs on, were you?
Yeah, and I wasn't combative or saucy or anything. I was just standing up for my rights.
Were you handcuffed in the front or the back?
Back.
And then he pushed you towards the police car, but
he pushed me several times.
Okay.
Yeah.
What did you say to him when he was pushing you?
I told him not to push me again.
Okay. And then you walked the police car and he put you in the back of the police car and he assisted you putting your legs in, because yes, the back of police cars are very, very, very small.
Confined, yeah.
Thank you, yes.
Yeah.
What happened then? I presume
Well, he read me my rights and asked me if I understood them, and I said, I understand the rights, but I don't understand why you read them. And I said, what are you charging me with? He said, creating a disturbance. And I said, yeah. I started laughing. I said, the only fools that created a disturbance is the little guy that got shot out of a cannon there, and you. I said, I didn't create a disturbance. And so we had a conversation about the handcuffs. I said, look, you got to take these off. He said, well, I said, I'm not a threat to you. I said, I never was a threat to you. I said, I don't know why you're overreacting the way you are. But I said, let's go down this rabbit hole. So while we're having this conversation, the Mountie that initially spoke to me, 5 minutes. Okay, I'm going to talk faster then. So the other Mountie came and they had a powwow in the front of the RCMP car. And then the guy that put the handcuffs on me, he said, I'm going to give you a ban for 6 months. And of course I was teasing him. I said, oh my God, I'm going to starve to death. I'm not going to get out. I was basically being a smartass, but I thought he deserved it. And when I got out of the car, I tried to ask him a legal question about showing your ID. And finally, after 4 or 5 attempts, he finally answered my question. And I asked him, I said, if I'm walking down the street at 3 o'clock in the morning, do you have the right to pull me over? Although I'm not committing a crime, do you have the right to ask for my ID? He said, if I'm suspicious, I can. Now, that's totally wrong. So, anyway, the two of them are under investigation, and I've asked
Chief Burke.
Sorry.
Oh, that's okay. Before
You're the
go
boss.
there,
I'm just, yeah.
No worries. because I will actually get to that.
Okay.
That's okay. Because once your interaction ended, you were given a piece of paper which you understood to be a basically Protection of Property Act notice, so banning you from entering the A&W at that location.
No
for
onion
6
rings
months.
for 6 months.
I'm sorry?
No onion rings for 6 months.
No English for 6 months. But you were banned from the property for 6 months.
That's
What is
correct,
it?
yeah.
And did the officer open a piece of paper that he served you with, and did he explain that to you?
No, he folded it over and gave it to me.
Okay, so it was folded
Yeah.
over, and he gave it to you, and he told you that you were banned verbally for 6 months. Was there anything within that piece of paper?
I
you
discovered
tell me
after.
about that?
Yeah, I discovered after I opened the paper there was a ticket for not wearing a mask, $2,422.
Did the officer inform you at any time that you were being issued a citation for not wearing a mask?
Never, neither one of them. And in fact, the ticket was written by the other Mountie, not by the Mountie that handcuffed me.
Okay. As I understand it, and what you've already said about
And oh, by the way, none of those RCMP officers were wearing a mask.
So the interaction that you had with the officer outside of the store, they were not wearing a mask?
None of them were wearing a mask,
Did-
in the store or outside.
When you say in the store, did an officer have an occasion to go inside the store? Did an officer go inside the store to find out what happened?
I don't know. The only time I seen the girl and the initial constable was when I was leaving. I don't know if they went back in.
But so the initial contact inside the store, so both of those officers came inside the A&W not wearing masks when you were there.
Correct.
But you issued a citation for not wearing a mask in a store, but although they were not either when they entered the store.
Neither one of them wore a mask.
Thank you for that. Chief Burke, I'm going to keep it short, but you've already stated as part of your testimony that you've made a complaint against these RCMP officers. You made a public complaint?
To Ottawa, yes.
Can you give me a brief overview of that?
Sorry?
Can you give me a brief overview of that?
Yeah, I called the sergeant to my house. We had a nice guy. He was a real nice guy. We had a good conversation, and he was shocked that I was given a ticket without my knowledge. He said, we don't do business that way, and he wanted me to lodge a complaint with Ottawa, which I did. It's still under investigation, and the constable that is taking care of it on the local area has found the initial RCMP officers in 6 violations, and the one that handcuffed me is under 12 violations. And they've asked me what I want it done, and I said that I want the 2 of them fired.
Thank you for that, Chief Burke. And in the interest of time, the documents are included, and I will just defer to the commissioners for any follow-up questions.
Yeah, just one other thing that we didn't touch on, Chris, is he told me that while I was in the car, and he told me he was going to ban me, he did say that he wasn't going to charge me. And I said, yes, you are. So we had a little argument back and forth that I wanted him to charge me.
So to put that in context, that would be your interaction with the RCMP officer at the NW when you were placed in the back of the police car.
Correct.
And what was he not what were you arguing for to be charged with?
Well, he was going to charge me with disturbance, and then he said he wasn't going to charge me. And I said, no, I want you to charge me because we're down this rabbit hole. So I want you to charge me. And he said, no, I'm not going to charge you. And I said, why not? He said, I'm not going to charge you. That's where that was.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I know. We're running out of time, but I judge you as a pretty amiable man. That you're social and you're communicative, and I have a feeling that you're well known in public to your community.
Yeah, my wife doesn't want to go out with me because...
Join the club.
Yeah, okay.
So The question I had for you is, have you, it seems like, have you had people react to you this way before? Like, before this whole pandemic, did people generally react in this way to you? I mean,
Never. I'm not a confrontational person. Although I've never ever backed away from a fight. I've been an enforcer on the ice all my life, and being brought up in Glace Bay, if somebody looks at you,
okay.
in coal mining town, you're fighting all the time.
Then the Canadian Tire happened, and that was an incident, and A&W happened, so it's not an isolated incident. What do you think motivated these people to treat you this way? Apart from the fact you weren't wearing a mask, why would they react to you this way?
I would say, to sum it up, I would say the lack of knowledge, number one, the lack of education, and the influence that the medical health department and the politicians had on people by manipulating.
When you say the influence that the politicians and the media had on people, exactly what do you mean by that? What kind of influence?
Well, you had politicians that were passing laws that, we got a young girl in here that she protested against Dr. Straying, and she ended up in jail for six days. And the person that wrote that law, Brad Johns, who's the Minister of Justice, happens to be one of the most crooked people. I don't care about being sued.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's. I think I've got my answer, but thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Chief Burke.
Yeah. Well, Alan, I want to thank everybody for coming here. I was impressed.
You have a question? Just 1 second, Chief Burke. We do have one more question, I believe. Sorry about that.
I just wanted to ask if the two fines have gone to court, and what was the outcome, or was it stopped when you did the investigation against the RCMP?
Sorry, I didn't hear you.
I have to eat the mic now. I just wondered if there was any follow-up in court with the two fines, or if the accusations or the charge that you laid against the RCMP officers, if that has stopped the court action. I'm just wondering where it went from here, if there has been any follow-up.
My Canadian Tire ticket will be addressed on June the 1st at 6 o'clock. The RCMP ticket, I'm going to have to check on that. Chris and I had a conversation about that. He asked me if I went to court over that, and I said, well, it was one of the stipulations. I asked the sergeant to drop it, given the fact that it wasn't presented to me.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief Burke.
Well on it.
Thank you, everyone. We now have a 10-minute break.
I don't know where Chess just went, but.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to resume the proceedings. Next witness is Sabrina McGraw. And Ms. McGraw, do you affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Ms. McGraw.
Hello.
Ms. McGraw, I understand you're here today to testify with respect to the loss of your employment due to provincial COVID mandates.
Yes.
Okay. Where were you working?
At Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation?
All right, and that's a provincial government
Yes.
job? And what were you doing there?
I was manager for the last 3 years, and 3 years previous to that, or 2 years previous to that, I was assistant manager.
Okay, and were you represented by a union?
Yes.
Did your collective agreement provide for any sort of vaccination status as part of the terms of your employment?
No.
And what position, sorry, you indicated you were a manager. Were you a valued employee for the Liquor Commission?
I was. Just the year previous to being placed on unpaid leave, my store had won top performing store, so it recognizes overall sale results and leadership.
Mm-hmm. And that reflects on you as manager of the store?
Yes. Yeah.
All right, and anything else with respect to your value to the store you're working for?
Yeah, I received model performance on my latest PA, performance appraisal, which is a very rare, it's very rare to get that because they just don't give them out to just anybody. So I did a pretty good job to get to get it.
Nice. And so what year did you have that, the model performance?
2021.
Okay. What mandates and protocols did the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission adopt?
We did masking, plexi, 6 feet distance, and then the latest was the vaccine mandate.
And when was the vaccine mandate brought in?
We knew about it in October, but it was implemented January 15th.
So in October, they delivered the message to the employees, but it was going to be effective January 15, 2022?
Right,
Okay.
for current employees.
All right.
Anyone that was new to the corporation had to be done by November the 1st.
Okay. Had to be done, meaning?
Fully vaccinated.
All right. And were they required to show proof of that?
Yes, there was a declaration form that had to be filled out.
And with respect to the deadline of January 15, 2022 for the existing employees, was proof required?
Yes.
And what was going to happen if proof was not required? I'm sorry, I phrased that wrong.
Okay.
What was going to happen if proof was not provided?
People would be placed on an unpaid leave of absence.
Okay. Was the adoption of this vaccination mandate contrary to some of the earlier views held by the employer?
Yes.
And in what way?
Well, in May of 2021, there was an occupational health and safety meeting and at that meeting, vaccinations were brought up. And the response was, vaccination is not required by law. It is an individual choice. Therefore, employees are not required to be vaccinated to be in the workplace.
Okay. And were you reading from the minutes from that
Yes.
meeting? All right. And those minutes have been delivered for filing as an exhibit, but we don't have an exhibit number yet. How did you feel about the vaccination mandate?
I was 100% against a vaccination mandate. I think everyone should have the choice as to what they put in their body, and it shouldn't be a choice as to keeping your bodily integrity or losing your job.
And so how, if at all, did the environment in your workplace change after the vaccination mandate was announced?
We recently had a new regional manager, Kim Jackman, and she came into the store about the 1st of November, and we had a cutout of Dana White. He's a UFC person. We were promoting his new liqueur. And when she came in and she seen it, like a lot of stores had it. It wasn't just our store. But she demanded that we take it down immediately because he was anti-vax.
Okay. And was there anything on the poster that was related to vaccinations?
Just
No.
a picture of him.
He
That's
was-
all.
And he was promoting his product,
liquor,
his own
yeah.
product, a liqueur?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, that same regional manager, it was like 7 o'clock on a Friday. She came flying into the store, and she was being aggressive because she had reports that we had anti-vax propaganda up in the store, which we absolutely did not. But she went through the store with a fine-tooth comb, didn't find anything, but she made us take a poster that we had up at the front of the store down, and it was handmade by our team, and it was just telling the pouring amounts, the proper pouring amounts, but it said "Cheers to poor choices" on it. So
Okay.
that's what she had us take down, just in case that's what people were complaining about.
Okay. And so the cheers to poor choices was with respect to the portion amount that you might be consuming of
Right,
alcohol?
because we want to be socially responsible
All right.
and making sure that people are, ingesting the right pouring amounts.
All right.
Yeah.
Anything else?
Yeah, I was having a conversation with an employee from another store on LinkedIn, and he had wrote a comment, because we had been discussing, the mandates and things like that. And he wrote a comment to me saying, "I thought you were leading your store to becoming fully vaccinated, not becoming fully unemployed."
Okay. And that was in the context of some conversation you were having with him about the mandates?
Right.
Yeah.
And then he deleted me. So
And then what?
he deleted me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you acquiesce to the mandate to vaccinate?
What's that?
Did you go ahead and vaccinate due to the mandate? No.
No, I did not.
Were you, and what happened as a result?
I was placed on unpaid leave
And when did that happen?
January of 2022.
Okay. Did you ever go back to the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission?
No, we had the option of going back in May on the contingency that we fill out a vaccination declaration form.
All right, and so tell us about that form.
So it's just a form to say whether or not we were vaccinated. They still wanted to know. We could go back into the workplace being unvaccinated, but they wanted to know whether or not we were.
Okay.
So we still had to attest to our status.
So at that point, the mandate to vaccinate had been lifted in the store?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Had it been lifted generally in the province?
It had been lifted in the province 7 weeks before. The NSLC extended theirs for another 7 weeks.
Okay. During that period you were off, you said from January 2022 through to May, did you have any other source of income?
No.
And did you apply for EI, employment
Yes.
insurance?
Yes,
What
I did.
happened with that?
I was denied.
On what basis?
Service Canada deemed it as misconduct,
And what were they calling misconduct?
not following the vaccination mandate.
Did you file an ROE with Service Canada for your application?
Yep.
And did the ROE say anything about misconduct?
No, it just said unpaid leave.
And so were you able to determine how someone at Service Canada found that there was misconduct related to the vaccine policy when that was not on your ROE?
They said they called the NSLC, and when the NSLC told them it was mandate related, they put down misconduct.
Okay. Did you apply for a reconsideration of that decision?
I did.
And what happened?
Denied.
And you have a union?
Yep.
Or you did have a union. Did you go to your union at all?
I did. I went before it was even mandated. Once we found out it was going to be mandated, I went to them right
Okay.
away to
That
try
was
to...
October 2021 when you learned about it? Okay,
Yeah.
so you went to your union, and what happened?
They would do nothing. They said the employer was allowed to mandate vaccinations.
And did they base that on any particular opinions? Did they?
They just said case law.
Okay. And so was there an indication that they went for legal advice or anything of that
They
nature?
said that they went to legal counsel and asked legal counsel, and that's what they said.
And so the determination was that they felt you would lose, so they
Right.
may as well not fight it for you.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you have an opportunity to see whatever legal advice was provided to the union?
No,
Did you ask for it?
I did ask for it.
And what happened?
They denied my request, saying that they don't provide union members with that information.
Did you bring any other grievances?
There was a grievance in April, but the union approached me about that grievance. It was the time period between when the government ended their mandates and the NSLC kept theirs for an additional 7 weeks. That was the only period of time that the NSGEU was willing to grieve, was
Okay.
that time period.
And what happened with that grievance?
For me, it was withdrawn because I was no longer working at the NSLC, so they withdrew mine, but other people got something.
Okay. And so that was for the people who were placed on leave without pay. The grievance was with respect to that short period that they
Right.
should have received their
Just
pay.
that 7 weeks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And by that time, you had left your employment altogether? Okay. And so you were on leave without pay for a period of time. Did termination happen at some point?
They deemed me as being resigned from my position if I didn't fill out the declaration form by June the 12th. I was considered to have been resigned from my position
Okay. And why were you opposed to filling out the declaration form?
because it's still giving out my medical information. I would have done it before if that was the case, right? So there was no point in doing it that late.
Yeah. Did you take any other positive action to try to combat the mandates and your concerns?
I did. I emailed the Premier, Tim Houston, no response from him, even now. And I wrote my HR and a few senior VPs. I emailed them all.
And what happened with those emails?
As far as the senior VPs, no response from them. HR responded within a day saying that the appropriate people would see my email. And then I received a response on January 13th, which is 2 days before
Okay.
the mandate.
And what was the general substance of your letter to Mr. Houston?
Just explaining why mandates shouldn't be implemented, especially when it comes to, losing your job. Like a lot of people got it just to keep their job, and that's forever in them now, right? So, I mean, people did it to keep their job, but at the end of the day, you're still dispensable. Like you can get that to keep your job and they can still let you go. So then you would have done it for nothing.
And the substance of your letter, your emails to HR?
Pretty much the same.
Yeah.
A lot of it was copy and paste.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And you brought with you today, so there's the minutes we referenced. You brought with you also your 2021 annual performance check. You talked about your good performance appraisal. We have that with us, which will be entered as an exhibit. You brought with you today your email to Tim Houston and your termination letter from the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. You brought with you today your response from Service Canada declining your claim and the reasons why they declined it, as well as your response from the union with respect to your grievance, and your communications to HR. Is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And those, I believe, are scanned, but we don't have exhibit numbers yet, but they will be filed. All right, those are all my questions. Thank you for testifying, and we'll wait a
welcome.
moment to see if there are any questions from the commissioners.
Okay.
All right. Thank
We're
you
good?
very much, Ms. McGrath.
Thank you.
You have the choice of swearing on the Bible. I believe there's one on the desk, sir.
I'll just let my yes be yes. So you just ask me and I'll say yes.
Okay.
I don't need a Bible to.
All right, so will I just follow the usual format I've been following and ask
Yes.
you to
Yeah.
affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
How are you?
Can you please state your full name for us?
Sure. My name is Jason McVicker.
Where do you live?
I live in just outside of Charlottetown, Prince Edward Island.
And what do you do for a living?
I'm a pastor.
Pastor McVicker, you're living in PEI at this time.
Yep.
Where were you prior to moving to PEI?
Well, I'm from New Brunswick, and for 11 years I did ministry in New Brunswick, Fredericton.
You were a pastor at a ministry in Fredericton, yes?
Say that again?
I said you were a pastor at a ministry in Fredericton
Yes. Yep. For 11 years.
for 11 years. Can you tell me more about your time at the church in Fredericton, please? And specifically, I'm interested in incidents that happened to you regarding your status, if you
Sure. With regard to COVID and the pandemic and everything, my experience was pretty unique in that I ministered to a lot of people who, the church existed in a low-income area, and so when the mandates all came rolling out and the lockdowns came, there were a lot of people who were adversely affected by all that stuff. And so I was ministering to a lot of people, and people in really hard ways. Like I was dealing with people who were struggling with suicide. I was struggling with domestic abuse from the lockdowns, people just being locked up together. It was mostly older people who were doing that. And extreme loneliness from the older community as well. So I had seen firsthand kind of the negative effects of all of the policies that were coming down from the government. And then it never really affected me. Our family was fine. We just rolled with the punches as they came. It wasn't until it was the end of September when the mandates for the vaccine came into effect, and Dorothy Shepherd, on behalf of the government of New Brunswick, had approached the faith communities and had approached churches, and it had basically, in an effort to get the the vaccine uptake to 90%, they wanted churches to promote the vaccines among their congregation, and they encouraged vaccine mandates. And then the government had implemented a policy that said if churches would require proof of vaccination, that they could operate full capacity, no restrictions, no masking, nothing. But if they weren't going to implement the proof of vaccines, then they would have to go back to their operational plans. And that's when my experience went from ministering to people who were struggling with these different mandates and these different policies to just being on the receiving end of some of those negative outcomes. And it all began October 3rd, so short but very little, I'd say 8 days after Dorothy Shepherd had approached the churches. I had received a letter from our board basically making my vaccination status the new measure of my ministry and my character. And they had included in this letter, well, they had indicated that the vast majority of the congregation and the vast majority of the board felt that vaccination was the only way out of this pandemic, and that my opinions with regard to the whole pandemic, but mostly my refusal to receive the vaccine was causing huge troubles in the church. And I'll just read you some quotes to give you an indication of how they they just made it the measure of my ministry, my character, the fact that I wouldn't get vaccinated. So they, in terms of ministry, they said, quote, that I was exercising poor judgment and a lack of discernment, that I had created deep wounds in your flock, that I had created barriers to you being able to teach, nurture, and guide, that it was a lapse of wisdom, that it was a portent of future errors that could affect you on the pulpit, that it was an erosion of trust and confidence, that it was creating division in the congregation, and that there was a need to repair and rebuild the congregation.
Just for the commission, the document Pastor Vic was referring to has been entered into electronic evidence. Sure. And will be available to you.
In terms of my character, the letter went on to say that I was placing my physical health before that of the congregation, and that I was placing my own physical health before that of my own children and the children of the congregation.
So before this, Mr. Pastor Vicar, I just want to ask a question. Because you had been there at that for about 10 years. Yeah, well,
it was actually the anniversary of my 11th year that all of this was happening. But it was 10 years. It was really good years. No conflicts, no there were no issues whatsoever. So the board that now attacked your character rather significantly, and they just redefined it. It was because it was 10 years. It was fine. I had a great relationship with the congregation, good relationship with the board. It wasn't until my refusal to be vaccinated that suddenly my character and my ministry took on this whole new light. So in the 11 years prior, you've taken this parish, this community, and community of faith, and you've built it. And what did you build it from, and how did that come about? Well, they'd had a tumultuous period where it was basically just a mass exodus of their congregation, and I had come about 2 years after that had happened, and they were down to I'm not even sure, it was around 20 people or something like that. And over the years that we were just rebuilding, and we had gotten it up to, just prior to the pandemic, it was around 45, 50 people. And then the pandemic came, and just had crazy swings after the pandemic. But so you had a significant increase from when you initially took it over until the end. Yeah, we were making good progress. And you said during that time, had you at the board ever had any other sanctions or complaints about how you led the ministry, how you interacted with the members? No, nothing formal. There was differences of opinions about little things, but it was all no, nothing formal, no reprimands, no anything, like literally no conflict with congregation. Like,
So no poor judgment and or lack
no.
of discernment.
No,
at any time?
everything that was laid out in this letter was purely related to the vaccine, had nothing to do with my actual ministry.
So when you say it was purely in the letter, nothing, and actually had nothing to do with your ministry, did the board present you with any evidence from the congregation to support the allegations that they've levied against you?
No, well, leading up to it, like I wasn't shy about my opinions outside of the church setting about my, like how I felt about all these restrictions and how I felt about the vaccine, and so we disagreed on that, and there was constant pressure once the vaccines came into effect. There was constant pressure from the board, especially for me to get the vaccine, and I refused for the longest time. And it was mostly just because I was so healthy. All the evidence that I had seen in terms of pure numbers, I didn't watch TV, so I wasn't really subject to all the fear mongering that was going on. I went to the government website and just read the numbers, and so I made my choice based on those numbers. And so the pressure was constant. It wasn't until the government kind of approached the churches that it went from just them disagreeing with. I had no idea that they felt this. I knew they disagreed with me, and I knew that it was frustrating for them. Once that letter was written, I had written, well, they had required 3 things of me in this letter. They said that they wanted me to outline steps that I'll take to create a path to healing the wounds described above. And they wanted me to detail how I would perform my pastoral duties, and they wanted me to elaborate on what I could do to ensure the congregation's physical health. Again, because I'm unvaccinated and apparently dangerous. And so I wrote them a letter. I just answered their 3 questions. I let them know that as far as the steps that I'll take to create path to healing, I didn't know the congregation. I knew they had problems with how I was, with my views. I didn't think it would affect my pulpit or my ministry at all. I just thought it was a disagreement about a worldly matter. But I had no idea the congregation that they were. So anyway, I wrote them a formal response. I said, as far as healing the wounds, I don't know who's hurt. I don't know who's so offended. Like all of these things that you're putting before me, I don't know who I would approach. I don't know who feels it. Nobody's coming to me with this stuff. I had no idea that people were so, took so much offense to the choice that I made.
The congregation didn't.
Yeah, there's no indication. Again, everybody, like I knew that I was the minority view. I just had no idea that it was the measure of my ministry and my character at that point. I said that. I just have no idea how I would heal wounds that I didn't know existed. But I also say, as far as the second one, they said they wanted me to detail how I'd be able to perform the pastoral duties. It was simple. The government had laid it all out, and they had given us an ultimatum. They said if you require vaccination and you require proof of vaccination, that you could operate full capacity. I said, I won't be vaccinated, so that'll, if you're going to require proof of vaccination, I can't even minister, so that'll take care of that. But if you don't, if you take option B, we'll just do what we've always done. We'll do the operational plan, which I wrote.
So they gave you the ultimatum.
Yep.
That essentially you need to get vaccinated. If not,
no, they didn't say. They never once said I have to get. They kept asking and asking and asking. And the way the letter was written, it was obvious that was the outcome they were going for. That what they were trying to portray was that my ministry was in shambles. What they were trying to portray was that my ministry was going to be impossible without vaccination. And so the other thing that they asked was to elaborate on what you can do to ensure your congregation's physical health. I told them that was absurd. Like, you can't ensure your physical, like, you can't ensure, neither can I. Nobody can ensure people's physical health. I told them I would do the things that I have been doing. I'll abide by all of the actual practices that we had implemented, the operational plan. I'll do the physical distancing when it's required. I'll do the masking when it's required. I'll do the... even when it came to my vaccination status, I was always very forthright with people. I put the ball in their court I wanted them to know that if they were uncomfortable with my vaccination status, that I actually had a colleague, a pastor friend, who would be more than willing to minister to them in person if they wanted. Like, everything was in place to, as far as, even though I didn't believe that stuff about me being more dangerous, if they felt that way, I accommodated them.
So you took steps, you said, for people that were not comfortable with you, because you said a one-on-one. So did you also, aside from having a congregation on your typical Sunday, I suppose, church time, you also provided services to people on a one-on-one basis?
Oh yeah, I did a lot of counseling, did a lot of, we would do, so there were corporate ministries that I would engage in, so I would do the Sunday service, preaching, teaching. I'd be on the stage with them, leading in worship and stuff. And then there'd be the Bible study, and then we had a prayer group as well, but I didn't lead that. I had somebody else leading that. And the rest was all one-on-one stuff. A lot of people from the community, especially when COVID hit, there were a lot of people, once word got out that there was a pastor in town that would hear you out instead of wait for their turn to tell you why you're wrong about the vaccines, they started coming to me. And that's when I started dealing with people who had such crazy struggles. And plus, it was the neighborhood I was in. I was already very well known, very well liked in the community, and people were in and out all the time.
Did you advise the board members that you had made arrangements for a vaccinated pastor to take over counseling or the sessions for you if the person you were cooking to see wanted counseling? When they
had written that letter and I wrote my response, at the end of the response, I told them, I was like, it's very clear from this letter that there's nothing good is going to come from me defending myself. And you've already made it super clear that my judgment in this regard has put me in a place where my ministry is not even, like, if this is the new measure of my ministry, like, you shouldn't want me to be your minister. And so I said, at the end of that letter, I was like, I don't see a path forward. I basically said, like, it seems to me that nothing short of me taking ownership, taking responsibility for all of these so-called hurts and all of these...
How about I read it?
What's that?
I have it right in front of me. I can read it.
What's that?
Then you said I have it right in front of me. That way you don't need to try and refer from memory.
Yep.
Again, this is entered as an electronic exhibit. And it's, quote, to be frank, your letter strikes me as unrealistic, unreasonable, and unfair. It's clear to me that nothing good will come from me defending myself. And by your own account, nothing good will come from me exercising my own judgment when it comes to these vaccines. For this reason, I believe it is time for us to discuss how we can part ways in a way that keeps both parties, in brackets the board and myself, close bracket, above reproach.
Yeah.
What was the result of your reply to their letter?
Well, they called it a closed session meeting, so I went to the meeting. It was just the board and myself, and they took my phone because they didn't want it recorded. And anyway, it was one of the craziest things I've ever experienced in terms of, I consider it to be abusive. It was just they took turns basically reiterating everything they had written in the letter, but it was so much more. Anyway, it was.
What happened within the meeting? Can you give us a brief summation of what happened? How did you feel about it when you were there? Were you heard?
Oh yeah, it was. I considered it abusive to the point where
abusive. I'm sorry?
I just let them say their piece after a while. I didn't say anything after a while, and when they were done, I reiterated that I wouldn't be getting my vaccine, and that they need to deal with that. That they seem to be hyper-focused on this idea that I can be convinced. And it was funny, like, even at that time, it wasn't even that I was refusing the vaccine entirely. I wanted to see how the winter played out, because Omicron was already happening in Europe, and it was already, like, all these numbers were rolling in, and I was like, I don't even want to revisit the issue until the springtime. I said, for now, I'm not going to get it, and you need to deal with that, and you need to decide what you want to do, because it sounds like if you really believe what you wrote in this letter, I'm not fit for ministry. If this is the new measure of my ministry and character, I'm not fit. And so you need to deal with that reality. So after that, they asked me to leave the meeting, and I did. And I waited that night for kind of confirmation of what they had decided, and I didn't get it until the morning. And they had decided that they didn't want to do anything rash, and so what they would do instead is they would move everything online except for the Bible study, the prayer group, because I wasn't part of the prayer group. So they moved it all online. They asked me not to meet with anybody in person, especially unvaccinated people. So basically,
I'm sorry.
Yes.
You were unvaccinated yourself, and they
Yes.
asked you not to meet with other unvaccinated people?
Yeah. They asked me not to meet with anybody in person. Basically, self-isolate.
Okay.
So.
Was there a reason given why you shouldn't
No,
meet
because
with...
at this time, everything was starting to open up a little bit. Like the government everything was open in the government, everything was open in businesses, everybody. It was only our church. As far as I know, there was no other business, no other church, no other government entity that was shutting down. It was just our ministries that were going to shut down. So they shut it all down, asked me not to meet people in person. So I did everything online, and after that, I'm kind of losing my train of thought here.
So you left the meeting, you were waiting to hear something back from the board that particular night to see how you're moving forward.
Yeah, and so they wanted to shut it down for 4 weeks, and they started kind of piling on these restrictions. And so I had assumed that was a response to my letter, because in the letter I had responded to them saying, like, well, just do ministry the way I've been doing ministry. We'll abide by the government's policies, and we'll just keep rolling forward with our operational plan. And when it's open, we'll be open, and when it's closed, we'll be closed, and we'll do what we've done for the past 6 months or 4 months or however long it was. And then we had the operational plan in effect. And so they started piling on. They started piling on like all of these new restrictions of their own accord, just based on their own opinions of so-called numbers. And I had moved the online stream, especially for church. I moved it ahead an hour because nobody else in the city was closed. So I wanted to take my church to family, or take my family to church. And so I moved the live stream ahead an hour, and I took my family to church. And I got an email that afternoon, I think it was, just asking from the board, asking why I had moved the live stream ahead an hour, and I told them I wanted to take my family to church. And then after that, I received another letter reiterating those three things. Again, they asked me again, we want you to, tell us how you're going to protect the congregation. We want you to tell us how you're going to do ministry. So it was essentially like, here's a whole bunch of new restrictions. Now, how are you going to do ministry?
So, Pastor McVicker,
Yes.
Ultimately, what
Yes.
was the outcome of the conversations, the meetings between you and the board?
Well, at the end of the meetings, I got the distinct impression, I wasn't going to resign because I didn't think I did anything wrong. And I wanted them, if they were going to make this the measure of my ministry, I wanted them to fire me for it. Like, if this is the new measure, you're going to have to deal with it. Like, you're going to have to be the ones who initiate all of this. And so, at this point, I've lost 20 pounds. I'm a guy who can't afford to lose 20 pounds. Like, I was the most stressed I've ever been in my entire life. My ministry was in shambles as far as I knew. I had decided I'd call a congregational meeting because it was clear they were trying to force something, but they weren't going to be the ones who wanted to initiate it. I wasn't going to quit. And so I wanted a congregational meeting. I wanted to bring them into it and say, is it appropriate for this to be the new measure? If they agree, well, then vote me out. If you disagree, let's move on and let's put this behind us.
And the meeting that you're referring to, congressional meeting,
Yeah.
what is that comprised of?
You can call these anytime you have a decision that needs to be made that affects the whole congregation, you bring the congregation together with the board and you talk about it, you work it out, you hash it out, you create the agenda, you create the documents you need. And so that's what I did. I had emailed the board and I told them I'm calling a congregational meeting. I need you guys to provide these documents. I was like, I need you guys to be the ones who call the meeting because you guys have been speaking on behalf of the congregation. You've been acting on their behalf, so you guys are going to be the ones to do this. And they denied that. They said, no, we're not willing to call a congregational meeting. So I told them, you need to revisit Constitution. I'm like, I gave you the option to do it because you've been talking on behalf of the congregation, but I'm calling a congregational meeting one way or another. So they said no. They said they wanted to have another meeting in person. And I said, no, I wasn't going to do that. After the last meeting, I was like, I've been advised by people not to ever put myself in that position again.
Pastor McVicker,
Yes.
sorry to interject, but in the interest
Sure.
of time,
Yep.
you ultimately decided to part ways with this church.
Yeah, so we entered into like I said, at that point, I was just done. I was like, I can't do this anymore. It's too stressful. My wife, my family, like all of it was brutal. It was the most brutal thing I've ever experienced. So I just wanted to be done. So I didn't even get to the congregational meeting. I called up my father-in-law, who's dealt with this stuff before, and got him to mediate a mutual parting of ways, a mutual agreement to terminate the contract. And so fast forward to, I forget the exact date, I'm signing this contract and I'm getting a bunch of texts from the congregation congratulating me on my new endeavors. And I'm like, what are people talking about? And I got several of these texts as I'm signing this document. And I finally, on my way out, I get another text from somebody asking me if this was really a mutual agreement. Like if the agreement was actually mutual. And I said, no. And they said, do you want to talk? And so I got together with them and they showed me the newsletter where they announced my parting of ways. And
I can read that out, actually.
Yeah, could you read that?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. And that was on October 24th.
Sure.
Sorry, October 27th. The letter, the parting ways that the board chose to word was as follows, quote, Jason's contract has ended by mutual agreement as he has accomplished all that he can in this ministry, and he will now move on to new endeavors. We thank Jason for his years of service and wish him all the best in his future plans.
Yeah.
End quote.
So they just flat out lied to their congregation. And I kept on getting these texts and these messages congratulating me, so I didn't know how to correct them because I didn't want to be, anyway. So it was just this big mess, and ultimately, over time and talking with people, had discovered that nobody knew. It was just the board, the individuals on the board were acting on their own accord. The congregation, 100% in the dark, had no idea that any of this was even happening in the background. So I had been misled by this letter that had portrayed my ministry as in total shambles. Like the congregation was completely in the dark, and now they had lied to the congregation about the nature of my leaving.
So, Pastor Vicar, what I hear you saying is that they've lied to you and they've lied to your congregation.
Yeah, like I never would have entered into mutual. If I had known that, especially after talking to people face to face from the congregation, that even though they disagreed with me, this never would have been the approach they would have approved of. This never would have been the way they would have wanted it done. I never would have entered into those. Like my ministry was destroyed over this stuff.
Thank you.
And I never would have gone down that path.
Yes. Thank you, Pastor
Sure.
Vicar. Unfortunately, we are out of time.
Yep.
I would like to defer to the commissioners for any follow-up questions, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your testimony. Sure. I'm not a religious. Well, I'm religious, but I'm not practicing like a pastor. But I have problem to write.
That's how everybody who's not religious talks to me.
Well,
they always put that caveat.
I'm a believer, but I'm a scientist, and I have a hard time to wrap my head around what you're telling me, because it seems to me, based on the level of understanding from your people on the board, that I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, that they have a deep understanding of the science behind what they are promoting.
Well, one of them was a pharmacist, so he had some understanding, but most of them are just lay people.
Would it be fair to assess that this is more based on faith?
Trust. They gave implicit trust to the people who were talking on TV.
Okay. I'm not a scholar of the Bible, but my understanding is that the reason why humans are alive today is because they benefit from a God-given natural immunity. Have they ever heard of that?
They saw it in me. I never got sick. I never got COVID. Like,
So it seems to me that what you are experiencing, correct me if I'm wrong, is a struggle of faith between two different beliefs. You believe in natural immunity, God-given natural immunity, and I can assure you there's a lot of science behind it.
I don't want to speculate on beliefs or anything like that. They, in the end, like, they processed, they just followed through on what the government put out there. And they did it in what I consider to be a super unethical way, and that kind of blows my mind that they would do it. And I never in a million years would I have thought that would have been the way, but I don't know. I don't know what their beliefs are. Like, that, their motivations, their intentions, that stuff's God's territory. I don't care. All I care about is what they did.
So what is your option moving forward for your ministry
Well,
or other ministry?
I'm in full-time ministry now. Like, we ended up moving to Prince Edward Island to be closer to my wife's family. And the moment I got over there, from the moment I got there, I was filling pulpits, preaching, and I was asked to apply to a few different churches. And, like, nobody had a problem with, and I was super frank. I was like, I'm not dealing with this stuff ever again. So I told them, I'm like, if I put my name in, like, you got to tell your congregation exactly where I stand on all this stuff. And I'll never preach it, and I'll never be heavy-handed. I don't care what people believe about this stuff. They make their own choices. I just want to be left alone with mine. And so I wanted them to understand. I was like, you just got to make sure they know that I'm not vaccinated. I probably never will be vaccinated, not with this mRNA stuff. And nobody cared. Like, everybody, there were several churches who were asking me to apply, even knowing that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
No, we have more questions coming. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was just wondering, there's a couple of questions I have. On the first one, is there anything in your contract with the church in Fredericton that would suggest that this may be a problem if your faith goes against what the world is promoting?
I stayed away from faith statements about why I wasn't being vaccinated. So, like, there's nothing in the contract that would, say anything like that. And I stayed away from it because, like, speaking from a place of faith, the Holy Spirit informed the decision I made. But I never appealed to that because I can't, it's an appeal to an authority you can't confirm. And so I just never did. I stayed purely with the numbers. I'm healthy. I don't need the shot. They don't stop infection. They don't stop transmission. So you're no more protected with me vaccinated than unvaccinated. Those were my two reasons for not, so I stayed away from that.
Okay, my second question is, do you know if the government offered financial incentives to set up church buildings as vaccination centers?
No.
You're not aware?
I'm not aware, no. And nobody ever approached us, or at least not that I was aware of.
And I believe that some of the arguments for churches closing fell to Romans 13. I believe that's right. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are when Christian churches or faith groups would raise the first couple of verses in Romans 13 as an argument for following the leadership of our secular governments.
I did, and we did. Like, we implemented the operational plans. We followed everything. There was no mandate for the church. Like, nobody mandated anything within the congregation, and the government didn't mandate anything for us. So that's not an argument.
Okay, and then my final question is, you suggested that the mandates in New Brunswick were decreasing at a time that these restrictions within the church were increasing. I'm just wondering, did you at any point in this journey that you've just gone through, did you feel like the province, the health authorities or the province, were targeting the church, or that there was religious
they definitely
bigotry?
targeted the church because, well, for one, I don't know what it was like in other provinces, but I know in New Brunswick, a huge portion of the unvaccinated population were from the faith community. And Dorothy Shepherd approached the faith community specifically, asking that they promote vaccines to their congregations and encourage them to require proof of vaccination in order to boost those numbers to 90%. So they most definitely targeted the churches.
So are you aware of other churches that went through this same struggle between the congregations and the ministers as a consequence?
There was only one other church that I knew of that went down the road that my church went down. The rest just navigated it fine. Actually, the church that my family and I landed in after all of this stuff, they were the exact same scenario as us. Their pastors were unvaccinated. They just handled it in a way more mature way.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Pastor McGregor. I appreciate your time this afternoon.
Thank you.
Bliss Behar.
That's the name. What's the name again? Okay. Behar. Mr. Behar, do you affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Can you tell us your full name, where you're from, and your occupation?
I'm Bliss Behar. I'm 18 years old. I'm from Bayvert, New Brunswick, and I'm a seasonal kitchen worker.
And when did you graduate from high school, Bliss?
I graduated June 2022.
So you were in high school during the height of the pandemic, roughly early 2020 to spring 2022?
Yes.
Can you tell us a bit about what your life was like before that time, before the pandemic started?
Prior to COVID, I was really active in my community, both within school and outside of it. I campaigned for the Green Party. I organized and spoke at protests for the environment. I was part of art groups and I performed at music festivals. Within school, I was part of band, choir, eco groups. So between those social activities and school, that was mostly what my life consisted of.
So then in 2020, when we begin to hear about COVID-19, were you concerned?
I was never concerned for myself, given that I'm a young, healthy person, but I was possibly concerned for my parents as they're middle-aged.
And when the vaccines came out, did you choose to take any of the available vaccines?
I did not.
How come?
I've always been raised to be skeptical about vaccines, so to me it's a case-by-case situation. And having seen that the process was rushed, I wanted to wait at least a year to see the rollout of the vaccine. But before I had time to make my own decision, it was mandated. And once it was mandated, I knew I would never accept the shot because I would never accept a forced medication.
What sources did you consult in making your decision?
There were a few sources. I did consume both mainstream media and also alternative views on YouTube, such as doctors like Vinay Prasad. And I spoke about that with my parents and all that information. I also spoke to my nurse practitioner, and I asked her about risks because I'm transgender and I take testosterone, and I'd heard about young men having higher cases of myocarditis. So I was concerned about that, and she dismissed that and told me there was absolutely zero risk and that I should just get it. So I found that discomforting, and so given all those different forms of information, I made my decision.
Why did you find that discomforting?
Because I know that there is at least not 0% risk. I know it was at least more than that, so I wanted her to at least give me more information, but she wouldn't really speak upon the matter much.
So in fall 2021, around the time that Nova Scotia announced that there would be a vaccine passport for civil services and other things, what grade were you in?
I was in grade 12.
And did you observe any impact in school life, in the atmosphere in school, in the school setting at that time after the announcement?
Yeah, so nothing was really noticeable. People didn't want to talk about it, but once the mandates were in place, once unvaccinated students were banned from extracurricular activities, the issue was just brought forth right to the front of the stage, and it sort of outed unvaccinated students to all the rest of their peers.
And did that sort of create any tension in the school?
It did for me. I didn't know any other unvaccinated students, but I wanted to avoid being outed, so I dropped out of school and switched to online classes.
Were you registered in any activities at that time for the fall?
I was registered for theater, art club, music, so yeah, a few things.
And outside the school? Anything outside the school?
Nothing at that point.
And so you dropped out of school to avoid being outed because you were worried about how you would be treated if people knew your status?
Yeah, I knew that I would meet a lot of negative reactions, so I did want to avoid that.
And exactly when did you drop out?
I would say it was sometime in October.
And can you list sort of what type of activities you had intended to do or that you would normally do around the fall at that time?
Yeah, there was a lot of things. Usually I would have been preparing to perform at the music festival for the Royal Conservatory of Music. I was probably going to have another art show that was outside of school. I was going to participate in theater and likely organize eco-protests as well, so kind of the regular things I would have always done.
And so you were not allowed to participate in any of those things at this point?
Yes.
And what was that like? How did that feel?
It was very isolating, and it was, just incredibly lonely.
At this time, what were you seeing in the media or on social media about vaccine-related topics or people who choose not to take the vaccines?
I saw a lot of hate and contempt for unvaccinated people. So every once in a while when I'd scroll through, I would see videos that said unvaccinated people deserve to die, that they are idiots, that they're just unlikable people that take up space. One person said they were glad that we were banned from things because they didn't want us to be around. So things of that nature.
And was this sort of in the main internet, or were you seeing any of this sort of coming from the mouths of people you knew?
It was primarily online, yeah.
And how did that make you feel?
For me personally, I was pretty hypersensitive, so I felt physically shaken for even sometimes for 2 days. I might have a migraine or feel very nauseous sometimes. Yeah.
Just witnessing sort of the types of things people were saying.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did your decision not to take the vaccine have an impact on any particular relationships in your life, friends or family?
I would say that it had an impact on every single relationship in my life, except that with my parents. But besides that, everyone looked at me differently and could hardly look me in the eyes, frankly. So a lot of interaction was cut back because of it.
Do you have any specific examples?
So there was one person who I had reached out to after I dropped out of school to meet up with, but I told her that I was unvaccinated because I knew it would come up anyways. But she told me that her mom banned her from seeing me.
After you told her that you were unvaccinated?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how did that feel?
That was really disheartening because I know that most young people didn't want to know me at that point because of my status. So I was excited to hear that she didn't judge me on the matter. So it was really disappointing to learn I lost another friend.
So she had originally known and was fine with it, but then later on had told you that she was no longer allowed to hang out with you?
Yeah, that's what she told me.
Have these measures impacted other aspects of your life?
I would say it impacted every aspect except physical. So primarily social aspects were the hardest, such as losing all the groups that I was a part of, but also financially because my father was put on leave without pay, so as a family we struggled. And as far as my future, that was also impacted as far as university, and just any sort of future plans that I had after high school.
And why were those impacted?
Well, I was generally banned from universities, and any connections I'd made with people, say, like in the art or music world, was cut off.
And can you describe a specific day or instance that was particularly challenging in all of this?
One of the hardest days for me was when my mom and I were discussing university opportunities, and I was on and off negative about it, but I generally really love education, so I was excited. And we discussed a particular university and were starting to get inspired by it, but then we went online to look up the COVID policies, and we found that I was banned not just from the physical classroom, but also banned from online classes. So that was disappointing.
So at this point in time, with everything up in the air, no indication of when these requirements are going to end, what was your outlook? How were you feeling about the future?
I felt pretty like I was in despair. It felt very bleak. I really felt, especially considering there was more like threats and more possible exclusion, I felt that there would never be an end to it. And because I felt that way, because I felt like our future, not just personally on my note, but as a country, our future was bleak, I did feel fairly suicidal because it seemed that it would never end.
Now that many of the measures have lifted and there's sort of less focus on COVID, would you say your life has returned to normal, or would you say that you experience any ongoing impacts?
In some ways, it definitely has come back to normal, which I'm grateful for. I have a job, I'm going to college, and those were things that I wanted, but internally, as far as my mindset, I think I'm changed forever. I think I may never ever trust my government again or trust any institution in Canada unless I see justice and restitution, but I'm still grateful for the physical things that have changed, such as the mandates lifting.
And I wanted to ask, is there any particular activity that was particularly painful or difficult for you to be excluded from? Or were there any particular instances of not being able to participate?
The hardest for me was music, because for me and for most people, music is about playing music with each other and collaborating, and it's a very beautiful experience. So my tutor who taught me clarinet for about 7 years, said that we can no longer do in-person classes together. That was very rough for me, especially also I couldn't perform at the music festivals or anything like that too.
And that was that tutor's personal choice? It wasn't a requirement?
For my tutor, it was personal choice, yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I guess I would just say that although in those moments I felt that there was really no hope, having seen the convoy and having seen movements like this, like the National Citizens Inquiry, I am given a lot more hope.
Thank you, Bliss. I'll turn it over to the Commission. Thank you.
Thanks.
Joe Behar.
Mr. Behar, do you affirm that you will tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes. Thank you.
Can you tell us your full name, where you're from, and your occupation?
Joe Behar. I'm from Bayvert, New Brunswick, and I'm a civil servant in the federal government.
And how long have you worked for the federal government?
20 years.
The same department or moved around?
I did one brief stint in another department just during COVID.
So primarily in the same department?
Yes.
And you were in this position in 2020, 2021?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And how would you describe your experience working there prior to the pandemic, sort of up to that point?
It was positive. You know, I enjoyed my job. I had become a manager in my department and built up some good relationships both with colleagues and with clients. So it was very positive.
And in 2020, as you began to hear about COVID-19, were you concerned?
With COVID?
Mm-hmm.
No, not for myself. Maybe for others, like my wife and my mom, but not overly concerned. No.
So when the vaccines became available, did you take one?
No.
At what point did you realize that your decision not to take the vaccine might cause problems for you?
I didn't. Right up until the time that I was put on leave without pay, I didn't believe that that I couldn't believe that anything would be done, that I would be, negatively impacted. I did see that there was a lot of negative stuff in the media and even in personal interactions that I'd had, but I didn't think that that I didn't think I'd lose my job.
And do you recall when the federal government announced the mandates for federal workers?
So I think I remember my wife saying she'd read something in the paper about this being talked about sometime in September, I guess, or so of 2021, maybe October. I don't remember when the election was at that time, sort of right after the election. And I remember saying to her, there's no way that's going to happen. I've got a union and we have courts in this country. We've got a Charter of Rights. They can't do that.
So you weren't concerned?
Not really. Not at first. Not when I heard that, no.
And the time that they officially announced the mandate, were you working in the office?
No. At that point, nobody was. We were all, and at that point, I was on a secondment agreement with another department, and the office was in Dartmouth, and I was in Bay Verte, so it's a 2-hour drive away. So there was never a question of being in an office. We were all working remotely at that point.
And did you inquire as to whether you'd still be subject to the mandate even though you were not going into the office? Sorry, did you request accommodation on the basis that you were not going into the office?
Yes, I mean, I did sort of, I did try and make a case that this was not a matter of workplace safety, and so there was no rationale for a mandate. And there was some case law as well by that time that sort of backed it up, but backed up my point. But I didn't expect that I didn't expect to be accommodated, but I still made the case.
And what was the response?
Sorry, this is the policy. I can't, there's no accommodation.
Had you offered to do anything such as masking when you go in or
Sure.
social distancing?
Sure. I mean, I did note that we were working remotely, but if I was required to go in the office, I said, I'll do tests. I'll do tests at my own expense. I'll wear a mask, etc., everything like that. But, that wasn't the point of the policy. The point was to try and coerce you into taking the vaccine. So it wasn't about being healthy or being, public health. That wasn't what it was about.
So you offered to do testing as well, and
Yeah.
still?
If I ever had to attend at the office, which, by the way, I never did.
So you were ultimately placed on leave without pay?
Yes.
And can you tell us a bit about the day when you were placed on leave?
The day was November 17th, and that was to be my last day. And I remember having working in the morning, finishing up doing some things, and then sort of leaving or thinking that in the afternoon I would take some, correspondence, some personal emails, some phone numbers and contacts off of my, off of my computer and from my files at work. And so I'd kind of, planned to do that. That's why I didn't do it in the morning, because I had other things to do from a work perspective. But then when I went to do it, I was completely locked out of the system. My phone was wiped. It was almost like I was canceled, so I couldn't get any of those things done. I didn't have any access to things like my leave balances or even later, any of the HR stuff I needed, like T4, stuff like that.
So they had locked you out before you had even left.
But they did it in such a way, it was very kind of preemptive. Like, it didn't even wait till the end of the day, which I assumed I had till, the end of the day, which would have been 4 o'clock. So it felt very punitive. Felt very punitive that it was done in that fashion.
And how were you feeling that day, that night, after being placed on leave from this job you'd been working at for 20 years?
I mean, again, like I said, I didn't believe it would happen until it happened, and people were telling me too, "Oh, there's no way they can do that. Don't worry, it's not going to happen." But by then I was sort of, thought that it would happen. So it felt real when it did happen. In sort of aftermath, it was probably, the most shocking day that to realize that I was in fact, left without pay, and just at that time of year too.
And are you unionized?
How do you mean?
Do you have a union, sir?
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Sorry, I thought you said something else.
No. And did you talk to your union about filing a grievance?
Yeah, so at first the union declined to, represent people like me. They said they were in agreement with the policy. But a bit after that, there were a few cases that came through in the courts that basically sort of said, if workers were working from home, it wasn't right that they be subject to a mandate, that the employer didn't own them, and you didn't sign away your rights when you've signed a labor contract. So the union kind of changed its mind and said it would represent us on a case-by-case basis, and I filed a grievance at that time against the policy. So that would have been early December.
And have you had any results from your grievance?
No, and it's been over a year, obviously. Everybody is dragging their heels on it, even though the collective agreement has set time limits for responding to first, second, and third level grievances. They didn't respond. They still haven't responded to the third level grievance. And I kind of didn't expect anything from those grievances. I wanted to take this to a labor relations board, but the process is that you had to go through the first stages of grievance. And like I say, the whole process should have lasted, according to the timelines, should have lasted maybe a month and a half or 2 months. It's been probably 14 months, and I still haven't got a response to the third level grievance. So obviously they're trying to sort of drag it out and hope that I go away and get tired of it.
So when you went on leave, how long did you think you'd be on leave for?
7 months.
Or that's what you expected, or?
Oh, I didn't know how long it would last. I expected that that was the end of my job. But I kind of, as I said, like I didn't do anything other than, file the grievance. I didn't quit.
Right, so you were on leave, you had you weren't expecting to go back, but you had no idea sort of when you might be able to go back if you wanted to. And were you receiving any pay at this time?
No pay or anything like that, no.
So did you eventually get have any other income during this time?
I did eventually get a job, another job contract, like a 5-month contract with a company in Ontario that, so I worked remotely, and that was sometime in February. So that was good. It didn't pay as much, but I liked the job and I liked the people that I was working with.
What would you say the financial impact has been of being sort of off your federal government job?
I mean, leaving aside the fact that I was working at that other job, which kind of defrayed a little bit of the financial impact, it was sort of the equivalent of being fined $60,000 or $70,000, right? That was the income that I didn't receive during that time.
This alternative job, it was significantly less, or?
Yeah, it was less. So I mean, that that put a dent in it. But we went through our savings quite a bit. And also, all through the month of November, December of 21, January of 22, we were without an income, and I, was looking for work, but I didn't, have, it was hard to find work at that time especially if you were unvaccinated. So, I didn't know, that's when we were
Not
going through
knowing, yeah.
our savings.
And did your decision or your views on this matter impact any friendships or relationships with family at this time?
Unfortunately, yes, it did, because, as I said, some friends were very, they were supportive, but others were not, and I can't really unsee that now. People who thought that it was okay for this action to have taken place, and to me, I can't forget that they felt that way. And I had some arguments with family members as well, and that's kind of put a strain on our relationship. Again, like, people want to get past it now and say, oh yeah, that was then, but get over it. But I can't unsee what I saw. So.
And would you say that the vaccine passports, had a significant impact on your life in any way?
I mean, I wasn't able to easily travel. For example, my mom is elderly and not well, and she lives in Ontario, so I couldn't hop on a plane to see her. I did go by car a few times, but that was, there was always the worry that you'd get stopped at the provincial border to check your passport and things like that. So there was that, the inability to travel on public transportation. Couldn't visit my daughter who lives in the States. And, there was this feeling of social exclusion as well, which was kind of harsh.
You're in a small community, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And so did you feel the impact within the community?
I mean, yes, especially in the small town that's right near us. There was this one incident where, people, my wife was on this group, for the Green Party, and she made a point about unvaccinated people being sort of excluded, and how we should be, the candidate should be standing up for them as well. And got somebody posted, well, Meg, we all know you're unvaccinated, and I saw you at the market the other day with no mask on. It's an outdoor market, and it's disgusting. Which was quite it's quite hurtful in a small community to have people call you disgusting.
So during that time, you're on unpaid leave indefinitely, couldn't visit your mother, ostracized by the community. How was your outlook for the future at that time?
Yeah, no, I think, that echo what Bliss said. I just felt I felt alarmed at what was happening in our country, and I felt like, the fact that seeing people going along with this in a public way, but also what the government was being able to do with seemingly no checks from the courts, or the charter didn't seem to matter. I was alarmed and fairly dark view of what was going on, and I could see that other people were too. The mood in society in general that I saw was depressed, and so it was a dark time. And I even we even talked about, like, where can we go that's better than this? Is there any other place? And for the first time ever, I contemplated leaving my country, which was pretty despairing.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Joe?
No, I mean, just that I think that, things, I think that it's great what you guys are doing here, giving people a chance to go on record and say what had happened, because as we move on from this, we have a risk, we run the risk of forgetting how it was, in the darkest time. So it's good to just put it on record and remember. So thank you for the opportunity.
Great. Thank you. I'll turn it over to the commissioners. Thanks very much.
All right.
Thank you, everyone, and that ends the proceedings for today, Friday. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning, Saturday morning, at 9 a.m.
When the National Citizens Representative stands before the Canadian government, representing the people, I would like the government to apologize to all the children.
But yeah, I really saw, and we are still 3 years later dealing with the mental damage that has happened to our children because of what the government has done.
My daughter is in high school, and the messaging at high school, which was very similar to the messaging we would have heard in the news, was that we all need to do our part for the greater good and follow these protocols and these mandates.
I was very concerned for my family throughout the pandemic. A lot of the rules that we were asked to follow stopped making sense, and a lot of them seemed to contradict each other.
I personally had an issue with the comments about, you must wear a mask, you must get vaccinated because you don't want to be responsible for the death of someone you love, like a grandparent.
But the biggest challenge as they started to roll out the first was the mask mandating. So a lot of, back and forth with mask on, mask off, offline, online, in the schools, out of the schools, no contact. And as kids are going through these development years, it's very hard already socially for them. Education-wise is one thing, but just learning who they are and how they are intermingling with their peers. This created a lot of divisiveness.
This is not the country that I grew up in. It's been a horrendous 3 years. And
why did you so abruptly pull the children out of school, flip their whole worlds upside down without any, I think, real thought into the long-term effects that it could have on the children?
As a medical professional, every day I see the impact of what these mandates have done.
But are you okay with what they did to us? Are you okay with what they did and how easily they could just pull the pin on our lives? But I have kids and they deserve better than this.
And unfortunately, it got to the point that the policies no longer made sense, and we really began to fear about the impact that these policies would have on not just us as a family, but especially on my child. My background, my educational background was in psychology, and kind of at the forefront of my mind throughout the past 3 years is what are the long-term effects going to be on our young children. We're going to see a lot of mental health issues such as depression in our younger generations that had to find a way to survive the last 3 years. I don't think we fully understand the scope of the damage that's been done.
So a question that I'd have on behalf of the National Citizens Inquiry to the government, and I would put the government at large, municipal, provincial, and federal. And I would ask the question regarding the vaccine passports that were implemented. At what point was there the data to support that this initiative needed to be put upon all citizens?
It created a them versus us camp, where if you followed suit, you're being a good citizen, everything's okay. If you don't, you are then almost shunned from what should be our natural rights to work, to go to school, to buy groceries, to do whatever you need to do. I just saw this as a divisive tactic that I couldn't really find any real rooted truths in.
My daughter, is a minor still, working at a restaurant, was forced to be the gatekeeper of policy that was implemented by government.
Like, I think the government has to change in a lot of ways.
You know, when you think about it, when in history has the government coerced students to do things they don't want to do? And then on top of that, they're giving them free credits if they agree to get a booster. I want the National Citizens Inquiry to stand before the government and ask them, why are you mandating children? They know they made poor choices. It's now their responsibility to apologize and resign. Hold themselves accountable.
In order for us to move forward as a country and not walk through these egregious, errors that have been made, we need to maintain open conversation. We need to not silent people who have different views. We need to have open and honest conversations and debates again. We need to allow ourselves to go, you know what? You have a differing opinion. Well, let's explore that together, and not shut down the ones who weren't, shouting out the government message. I think that's going to be really important in the medical community. Again, let's have conversations. I heard once that science is not to be trusted; it's to be tested, and that's what we did not see happen.
Yeah, I spent 3 years apologizing to my family for something that's not my fault.
Love each other. When the National Citizens Representative stands before the Canadian government, representing the people, I would like the government to apologize to all the children.
But yeah, I really saw, and we are still 3 years later dealing with the mental damage that has happened to our children because of what the government has done.
My daughter is in high school, and the messaging at high school, which was very similar to the messaging we would have heard in the news, was that we all need to do our part for the greater good and follow these protocols and these mandates.
I was very concerned for my family throughout the pandemic. A lot of the rules that we were asked to follow stopped making sense, and a lot of them seemed to contradict each other.
I personally had an issue with the comments about, you must wear a mask, you must get vaccinated because you don't want to be responsible for the death of someone you love, like a grandparent.
But the biggest challenge as they started to roll out the first was the mask mandating. So a lot of, back and forth with mask on, mask off, offline, online, in the schools, out of the schools, no contact. And as kids are going through these development years, it's very hard already socially for them. Education-wise is one thing, but just learning who they are and how they are intermingling with their peers. This created a lot of divisiveness.
This is not the country that I grew up in. It's been a horrendous 3 years, and
Why did you so abruptly pull the children out of school, flip their whole worlds upside down without any I think, real thought into the long-term effects that it could have on the children.
As a medical professional, every day I see the impact of what these mandates have done.
But are you okay with what they did to us? Are you okay with what they did and how easily they could just pull the pin on our lives? But I have kids and they deserve better than this.
And unfortunately, it got to the point that the policies no longer made sense, and we really began to fear about the impact that these policies would have on not just us as a family, but especially on my child. My background, my educational background was in psychology, and kind of at the forefront of my mind throughout the past 3 years is what are the long-term effects going to be on our young children. We're going to see a lot of mental health issues such as depression in our younger generations that had to find a way to survive the last 3 years. I don't think we fully understand the scope of the damage that's been done.
So a question that I'd have on behalf of the National Citizens Inquiry to the government, and I would put the government at large, municipal, provincial, and federal. And I would ask the question regarding the vaccine passports that were implemented. At what point was there the data to support that this initiative needed to be put upon all citizens?
Is it created a them versus us cap, where if you followed suit, you're being a good citizen, everything's okay. If you don't, you are then almost shunned from what should be our natural rights to work, to go to school, to buy groceries, to do whatever you need to do. I just saw this as a divisive tactic that I couldn't really find any real rooted truths in.
My daughter is a minor still, working at a restaurant, was forced to be the gatekeeper of policy that was implemented by government.
I think the government has to change in a lot of ways.
When you think about it, when in history has the government coerced students to do things they don't want to do? And then on top of that, they're giving them free credits if they agree to get a booster. I want the National Citizens Inquiry to stand before the government and ask them, why are you mandating children? They know they made poor choices. It's now their responsibility to apologize and resign. Hold themselves accountable.
In order for us to move forward as a country and not walk through these egregious, errors that have been made, we need to maintain open conversation. We need to not silent people who have different views. We need to have open and honest conversations and debates again. We need to allow ourselves to go, you know what? You have a differing opinion? Well, let's explore that together. And not shut down the ones who weren't, shouting out the government message. I think that's going to be really important in the medical community. Again, let's have conversations. I heard once that science is not to be trusted, it's to be tested. And that's what we did not see happen.
Yeah, I spent 3 years apologizing to my family for something that's not my fault.
Love each other. When the National Citizens representative stands before the Canadian government, representing the people, I would like the government to apologise to all the children.
But yeah, I really saw, and we are still 3 years later dealing with the mental damage that has happened to our children because of what the government has done.
My daughter is in high school, and the messaging at high school, which was very similar to the messaging we would have heard in the news, was that we all need to do our part for the greater good and follow these protocols and these mandates.
I was very concerned for my family throughout the pandemic. A lot of the rules that we were asked to follow stopped making sense, and a lot of them seemed to contradict each other.
I personally had an issue with the comments about, you must wear a mask, you must get vaccinated because you don't want to be responsible for the death of someone you love, like a grandparent.
But the biggest challenge as they started to roll out the first was the mask mandating. So a lot of, back and forth with mask on, mask off, offline, online, in the schools, out of the schools, no contact. And as kids are going through these development years, it's very hard already socially for them. Education-wise is one thing, but just learning who they are and how they are intermingling with their peers. This created a lot of divisiveness.
This is not the country that I grew up in. It's been a horrendous 3 years, and
Why did you so abruptly pull the children out of school, flip their whole worlds upside down without any, I think, real thought into the long-term effects that it could have on the children?
As a medical professional, every day I see the impact of what these mandates have done.
But are you okay with what they did to us? Are you okay with what they did and how easily they could just pull the pin on our lives? But I have kids, and they deserve better than this.
And unfortunately, it got to the point that the policies no longer made sense, and we really began to fear about the impact that these policies would have on not just us as a family, but especially on my child. My background, my educational background was in psychology, and kind of at the forefront of my mind throughout the past 3 years is what are the long-term effects going to be on our young children. We're going to see a lot of mental health issues such as depression in our younger generations that had to find a way to survive the last 3 years. I don't think we fully understand the scope of the damage that's been done.
So a question that I'd have on behalf of the National Citizens Inquiry to the government, and I would put the government at large, municipal, provincial, and federal. And I would ask the question regarding the vaccine passports that were implemented. At what point was there the data to support that this initiative needed to be put upon all citizens?
It created a them versus us camp, where if you followed suit, you're being a good citizen, everything's okay. If you don't, you are then almost shunned from what should be our natural rights to work, to go to school, to buy groceries, to do whatever you need to do. I just saw this as a divisive tactic that I couldn't really find any real rooted truths in.
My daughter is a minor still, working at a restaurant, was forced to be the gatekeeper of policy that was implemented by government.
I think the government has to change in a lot of ways.
When you think about it, when in history has the government coerced students to do things they don't want to do? And then on top of that, they're giving them free credits if they agree to get a booster. I want the National Citizens Inquiry to stand before the government and ask them, why are you mandating children They know they made poor choices. It's now their responsibility to apologize and resign. Hold themselves accountable.
In order for us to move forward as a country and not walk through these egregious, errors that have been made, we need to maintain open conversation. We need to not silent people who have different views. We need to have open and honest conversations and debates again. We need to allow ourselves to go, you know what? You have a different